The I'm Fine podcast is produced by L'Amour Media LLC and is run by Project Headspace and Timing. Project Headspace and Timing is a 501c3 that I started in 2017 after a veteran that I was a medic to decided to pull over on the side of the road and end his life. As an organization, Project Headspace and Timing works on veteran advocacy and veteran outreach. What that means is through the advocacy perspective, we try to connect veterans to other resources as early on into the process as possible. What that entails is early contact with veterans, forming a safety net with their family members, friends, and fellow service members, educating them on the resources, and when that veteran is ready to get help, we are there to make sure that they get the help that they need. The outreach aspect is put there to get veterans together to do productive and constructive things, whether it's out in nature, working with other businesses, anything to get them out around other veterans where those good conversations can happen if they want to have them. If you are interested in finding out more information about our organization, please visit projectheadspaceandtiming.org, our Facebook page, Project Headspace and Timing, or our Instagram, which is Project Headspace and Timing. And if you would like to donate to our organization, please visit our website, projectheadspaceandtiming.org, scroll to the bottom, and you will find a link to our Venmo. If you'd like to send us a check, our P.O. Box is P.O. Box 382, Manteno, Illinois, 60950. And if you'd like to sponsor or have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me at Eric P. as in Paul, at projectheadspaceandtiming.org. Thank you. Welcome to episode 8 of the I'm Fine podcast, where today we're going to discuss the issues that veterans have transitioning to the civilian world a little bit. We're going to talk about our personal stories, the issues that we had, and then after that, we get to talk to somebody who has done some extensive research into the subject, New York Times best-selling author Sebastian Junger.
Welcome to the I'm Fine podcast with your freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional hosts, Eric Peterson and Brad Stozick.
We're here.
We're here.
It snowed a bunch.
It snowed. Dude, I'm not ready for the snow. I
fucking love the snow, and you don't like the snow. You hate the cold, though.
I hate it.
See, like I told you before, like I feel like if you live in the Midwest, you are like the wildlings from Game of Thrones. Like, you didn't ask to fucking be here, but you're here, and you're going to deal with it, and you can't leave because of family. Like, we are the wildlings. You know what I mean? So when the winter comes, like, I'm just down for it.
No.
And we just use our hate of the construction of all the roads and like Illinois politics to keep us warm throughout the winter. You know what I mean?
I think Okinawa kind of ruined winter for me.
Was it super cold up there?
No, it was just hot. Subtropical island, dude.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah.
So one of the things that we'd talked about a few times, and it's definitely kind of been an issue for not only us, but a lot of veterans that we know, is kind of like transitioning back from the military world into the civilian world. There's plenty of organizations that have started just to deal with that. I think TAPS is one of them, is one of the most prominent ones. But it's one thing that the military is looking at. I know Illinois Department of Veteran Affairs is actually really trying to put some time and effort into figuring out why veterans are having issues transitioning into the civilian world. Yep. I think I've talked about my story a little bit before, but essentially, you know, I deployed as a team leader in an infantry platoon, came home, didn't like being here, became a paramedic, and then immediately, as soon as I got a chance, kept going back overseas. And then wife wanted me to come home, tried sort of, but then I did EP work where I was still doing like similar type of work. Like I couldn't just be here. And I think that's because I just had a really hard time accepting who I was here in comparison to who I was over there. Yep. And it's not like I was anything crazy over there at all, but it was just, I had that, for me, infantry, like I had a brotherhood, and it was a different type of freedom. It was a different type of world where I feel like I understood that world. And when I came home, have you ever seen Shawshank Redemption?
It's been a while, but
phenomenal movie. from the book Rita Hayworth by Stephen King. But in the book, or excuse me, in the movie, there's a guy named Brooks. And Brooks, he was like in prison for a super long time. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen that movie, it's like fucking 30 years old. But Brooks finally finds out he's getting out of prison, and he's been there like his whole life.
Yeah.
And so he immediately threatens his best friend so he can try to kill his best friend so he can stay in prison. And they're just like, dude, I'm sorry, man, you got to get the fuck out of here. And then he tries to keep up with the new world that he knows nothing about.
Yep.
He feels like he doesn't belong, and he ends up fucking killing himself. And I was just like, man, like that was such a powerful part of that movie for me.
Yeah.
And just because I sort of felt like I was watching the world go by when I got home, and I didn't understand how any of it fucking really worked. And you dealt with that in two different forms, because one,
Yes.
you got out of the Marines, you came home, so you had the issues there, and then fucking vision loss.
Yeah.
And now you got to figure out what that shit is. So what was that like for you? What were both of those like for you?
So I was not in combat at all,
Mhm.
but the brotherhood that you speak of in combat, you have that on the garrison side as
Yeah.
well. There's just something that embracing the suck, if you will.
Hell yeah, I have that on a patch.
But you build these bonds with these people, and it's silly. Like, for example, you could walk out of your barracks room, go 2 doors down, and my buddy and I, we would get the family size Pizza Hut. So it was probably like 18 pounds of pasta.
Yeah.
We would get 6 Mountain Dews. He would get 3. I would get 3. We would eat 8 pounds of pasta each, and we would just play Call of Duty or whatever game, and just having that at any moment is the best feeling in the world, dude.
And we talked about this like last night. Like the only thing I would draw some parallels to is I imagine people that like went to college, is the closest thing, because you walk outside your room and there's just, you go a couple rooms down,
Yep.
get the Xbox out, you play some, like, you just have this weird sense of like, I don't know, safety, security.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's very tribal. Like, it's nice.
Dude, that's how we celebrated Christmas one year in Japan. None of us went home because that's not a cheap plane ticket.
Oh shit, I bet.
And we all had, there was probably 13 of us on PlayStation, just in different rooms, and just playing on Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto or whatever. And it was one of the best Christmases I've ever experienced.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's amazing because, like, you have so little.
Yeah.
Like, some of the best moments that I had deployed were, like, drinking whiskey out of mouthwash bottles in a fucking shipping container
Mm-hmm.
with, like, 8 other dudes just laughing and carrying on. Like,
Yeah.
it's crazy how beautiful in a way that those moments were, how freeing those moments were. And then when you come home, it just doesn't work that way. You gotta call. Everybody's got a crazy fucking schedule, you know what I mean? And to try to make that kind of stuff work, there was just something so nice about, like you said, walk out of your room and just go grab the boys. Hey, you guys want to go get something to eat? Yep, let's go. Hey, you guys want to go to the gym? Yeah, why not? You know what I mean? And it's so much easier.
Yep.
Whereas we don't really have that coming home. And I feel like when you're overseas, you know what I mean? You're overseas 24/7. So the entire time you're there, if you're not acting like yourself, eventually your true self is going to come to the surface. And so, like, a lot of people, you know what I mean? I think when you're deployed, you get to know those people you're deployed with
Yep.
on a very real level.
Yeah.
Like, they call them battle buddies, and I was always like, man, can we just come up with something a little cooler than that?
Army strong hood.
It sounds like you're throwing up, kind of.
You
I
know,
always thought about that. But no, the dude that was my battle, that was in my room with me when I was in Afghanistan, his last name was Cummins, and like, that's my dude.
Yeah.
Like, we deployed. He was in St. Louis. He lives in St. Louis, and like, we went through a lot of shit together. That was our first deployment. Like, he lost someone in his family while we were deployed. Like, and we were both like gunners. He was mostly a gunner. I was like a gunner, but mostly a driver. But like, we went through so much, and every day, every mission, we came back to each other. We came back to like that's the dude that you're going to talk about that mission, about that whatever. And then, like, you know, he lives in St. Louis. I live in Manteno, Illinois. So years had passed, and we still follow up. We still, like, call each other, like, yo, dude, how's it going? Our families get together every once in a while. It's hard because of the distance, but we try to make that effort, and he's better at it than I am. But, like, dude, when my mom died, the day before the service, he calls me up. And I'm driving to pick up my uncle at the airport. And he's like, yo, dude, I'm just checking in on you, man. I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm doing okay. I'm going to pick up my uncle. And he goes, yeah, I just want you to know, like, I was going to make it a surprise, but, you know, I'm on my way right now. And, man, I fucking lost it. I started bawling. Because, like, that type of love, that type of relationship, it's hard to have those types of relationships, man, where guys would do that kind of shit for you, even years later. You know what I mean? And I'm just so thankful that I have those relationships with guys like that I can call them my fucking brothers. Yeah. And if something goes down, like, I know they have my back. Absolutely. You know what I mean? Did you have that a lot too?
Oh, yeah. I still do to this day.
Yeah.
I still do to this. I mean, I still talk to, like, my gunnery sergeant who every day we have a phone, at least half hour every day on the phone. It's that bond that I've been missing since 2016. It's that even though it's just a phone call, it's you still have, and like you said, you can go years without talking to these people. Years. You pick the phone up and it's like you guys just hung out yesterday. Yeah, or just left work.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best feeling ever. And like you said earlier, you can be yourself. You can be who you are as a person.
Yes, and it's extremely important. And with social media, it's got kind of easier because, I mean, you can keep up. Yeah. With your brothers, your sisters, see how they're doing. Yeah. Like with Cummins, because of our relationship, anytime I would see something super fucked up on Facebook, like I would tag him in it. Like I saw a story about a guy who like broke a light bulb in his ass or something. And nice. I commented on there and I was like, and I tagged Cummins. I'm like, Ryan Cummins, I'm really proud of you for being able to open up about your story and share it. So like other people won't make the same mistake. Like I will do that all the fucking, it'll do the same thing to me. But like what you just said, when we were deployed, I couldn't hide who I was. Oh. Nobody can. And these people that you're deployed with, they have to love you more or less for who the fuck you are, depending on the environment, because you have to rely on each other. Yep. And so I would say, like, I look at it in terms of percentages. Okay. So I think like my wife, like you think about your spouse, how much what percentage of you does your spouse know? Because for me, I think that's the most. So I'm going to say it's like 90, 95. I would say being overseas, it's pretty close to that because obviously you're intimate with your spouse. But when you're overseas, the experiences that you have over there, like those people, you are pretty much like yourself. Yeah. Oh, now, yeah. You put that in comparison to one of the first office jobs I got when I got back. Yep. I got an office job for one of the PI firms where I was working for. Dude, I was like 25% who I was. Really? And so much of the time I feel like I had to like not be who I was. I couldn't be funny because people didn't get my humor. I couldn't fucking swear. I couldn't do whatever. And like that kind of stuff built up in my head with different jobs because I was just trying to be quiet. Yep. Like do my job. You know what I mean? And you brought up something to me last night, like back home feeling like you're walking on eggshells. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I go to a school that doesn't really line up with my beliefs, if you will. Yeah. And I can't be myself there. Right. Dude, I would get kicked out. Right. There is no way that they would let me go to school there. And it's exhausting, dude. It's draining to go every single day. So it just builds on the loneliness. I put my AirPods in and go out my day. Take my AirPods out when I have class. Class is over. Pop them back in. Because that way, I can't be in situations where I'll put myself where people will find out who I really am or how I really feel or how, you know what I mean? Well, yeah, and like you're saying, you would get kicked out, but it's not like you want to walk around into every class and just sacrifice a chicken and be like, there you go. Like, you just want to be yourself. You want to feel like you can say whatever you want to say. You can have whatever emotions that you want to have. and you will not be judged for that. But when you're in an environment where you feel like you will be judged, especially coming from the veteran mentality when you're deployed, where literally you can say whatever the fuck you want, pretty much, you know what I mean? And then you come to a place where you can't swear. You have to be very careful on what you say and how you offend people. And because you might come off as intimidating. So if you could just change the way you do this, that, and the other. And then you're just like, dude, what the fuck am I?
Yep.
I'm not being myself right now.
Yep.
And then, like you said, compounds on loneliness, depression, all that kind of shit. It makes it that much harder, I think, to function back here, when you say.
I would agree. And I think the hardest, you said like finding yourself and being yourself. Dude, I joined the Marine Corps at 18. I didn't even know who I was when I joined the Marine Corps. So I feel like I'm still trying to figure out who I am.
Yeah.
And there's like barriers, even more barriers because of that.
Yeah.
So it's...
Well, like we talked about last night, dude. You know, you're figuring some shit out, and that's why we started this podcast.
Yeah.
Because we're both trying to figure shit out, and I'm going to guess out of the 300 million people that exist in the United States, that at least one of them is also trying to figure some shit out about themselves. You know what I mean?
I'd like to think that.
Like probably somebody. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just us two.
Just
like
two
we're
of us.
fucked up, and everybody's like, Jesus, look at these two
What the
guys.
hell is wrong with those guys?
But what I found, I mean, it's very easy to look up anything online about why veterans are having such a hard time struggling to transition in the civilian workforce. There's a lot of people that have a lot of different ideas as far as like why that is. But what I found is that the big thing is that sense of worth, because you don't so much have that anymore. Again, drawing some parallels from my life, you know, when I was overseas, my experience was anybody in my platoon, like we took care of each other.
Yeah.
And even if you hated somebody or whatever, like didn't fucking matter when bullets were whizzing by or when we hit an IED or when we're getting mortared or whatever. Like you're just looking for other guys that are wearing your uniform and you're going to take care of them. And then you come back here, and depending on where you work, like it's like jobs are more cutthroat. People are lying to you about shit. And it's not that type of open mentality where you're welcomed and encouraged to kind of be yourself. You know, like in the military, that you're encouraged to be yourself because that's what sets you apart from everybody else.
Yep.
So I mean, it's encouraged, really, right? I think it is.
To an extent.
Yeah.
To an extent. Like you can be yourself as far as like promotion. Like, is that what you mean? Like promotion wise, or like...
Well, just like whatever quirks you have, like
Yeah.
whatever things you want to say, however you feel about the world, like whatever it is that makes you who you are, like regardless of my time. And when I think about my time in boot camp or whatever, like those were the dudes that I remember, the guys that were a little different, you know, in a good way, bad way, whatever. Like that's why I remembered it. And you're encouraged. But like in the office type environment, it seems to me it's more everybody toe the line, everybody be the exact same. And while I know that the military and boot camp, they're more or less doing that too, it's not the same. It's just, I don't know.
From the like civilian sector, it feels a lot like, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this?
Yeah, it's more individual, not part of a bigger picture like the military is, where we just accept that we're just, you know, expendable.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of little cogs.
I actually didn't accept that until after I got out, though.
Really?
Yeah. Like, I didn't realize that I was towards the end, I didn't realize I was just a number. But
I figured that out super fast, like infantry, you know what I mean? But
I mean, you were also a grunt.
Yeah.
And that's totally, like, dude, I was a glorified lunch lady.
I mean, to be a grunt, you just have to write your name. And I say write because I don't even think you got to spell it right. Like, as long as you get letters on the paper. Well, it's probably not having paper. It's probably all computers. We do the ASVAB now, but like that's all you really have to do, you know, to kind of be a grunt. But yeah. So I think that it's really hard for a lot of guys to find that purpose when they come back too.
Yep.
And when people are glorifying you for your service, which is wonderful and it's really generous, it's really kind. But I don't need to be thanked personally.
No.
When somebody does thank me, I thank them for their support, and I just believe that. I just want to know that I fit in my community. I just want to know that I have a place.
Yep.
And it's not to say that anybody is any more important than anyone else, regardless of your status, because I don't believe that. I believe that everybody is equally important. We all have our place, as long as you work for it. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I want to feel, and that's what I was lacking when I first was having my issues transitioning back into the civilian world.
Mhm.
Again, trying to figure out what my place was, and through Project Headspace and Timing, all the shit that we've done, especially when it comes to getting other veterans involved, like, that's all we want to do. We just want to remind veterans, like, hey, this is your home too.
Yep.
You have things to offer. You know what I mean? Like, be a part of your community because you need to, because you have a perspective, you have experiences that matter and that your community would benefit from. So you need to try to be a part of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
But so before we bring on our guest, I just want to say, how fucking excited are you?
Dude, I'm pumped. I didn't know. I really enjoyed A Perfect Storm, the movie, and I didn't know that was Sebastian Junger.
Great fucking movie.
I mean,
It's a movie that I can watch now and still enjoy it as much as I did the first time, because it's I didn't even, when I first watched it, I didn't even know it was a real fucking story.
no, me either.
Yeah.
Me either. But I just want to say, piggybacking off that, I can watch any movie with Marky Mark in it.
Any movie?
And
I don't know
maybe
about
except for
any
the
movie. Did you watch Spencer Confidential on Netflix? It wasn't.
no,
wasn't
no.
bad. He plays a lot of the same guy, but Pain and Gain was fucking hilarious. I was a fan.
Just-
Marky Mark, yeah, he's phenomenal. And Fear was a classic movie too. Like, I'm all about Marky Mark. Italian Job. All right, yeah.
See,
Yeah.
See, I told you.
Yep. But so the guest that we're bringing on, he's a New York Times best-selling author.
Dude.
And I reached out to him after a veteran that our organization was finally able to get some help after, like, a long, arduous journey. And I was so exhausted afterwards, but I was also so thankful. And so I sent a message to Sebastian Junger. And Sebastian Junger wrote this book called Tribe. Tribe was a book that I actually recommend to any veteran that I know that's, like, having some issues transitioning in civilian world, wherever the case may be, just because it's not a super long book.
Yep.
And he uses real life experience coupled with history to talk about why he thinks veterans have such an issue transitioning in the civilian world. And so when I reached out to him to thank him, he fucking responded back.
That's awesome.
And I was just like, I wasn't expecting this to go any farther than this.
You
know
never
what I
do.
mean?
You send an email to somebody
Yeah.
famous, and you just
See what fucking happens, man.
yeah.
But
Well-
I'm super excited to have him on here.
Yeah, me too.
So here we are. I would like to introduce our guest for today. He might not really need much of an introduction, but I'll give one anyway. His freelance journalism has appeared in such magazines as Men's Journal, the New York Times, among others. And he has notable works to include The Perfect Storm, a true story of men against the sea, which eventually became the motion picture The Perfect Storm, and books like War, Freedom, my personal favorite, Tribe, and his award-winning chronicle of the war in Afghanistan in the documentary film Restrepo. Here today, we are so proud to have on Sebastian Junger. Sebastian, thank you so much for being here today again.
Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure.
So I can't tell you how much of an honor it is to have you here for our listeners to understand the context. I'd reached out to Sebastian after a particularly difficult case I was working on. Our organization, Project Headspace and Timing, works to connect veterans to mental health and substance abuse resources. And I had a veteran that I was working with for over a year, and we finally got him into a mental health and substance abuse facility. And it took so much out of me that night I felt so much gratitude that I just sent Sebastian a message. And I was just like, hey, man, I really want to thank you for everything that you've done, because, that book Tribe affected me so much that it spawned this nonprofit. And from that, you've helped out so many veterans that you don't even know. So again, I'm just incredibly thankful to have you here for that. So thanks again, Sebastian.
Yeah.
Now, over your work so far, from The Perfect Storm, Tribe, War, Freedom, the documentary Restrepo, you've been bringing the realities of the human existence to the surface for so many people. So my first question to you is, like, at what point in your career did you realize that these psychologically heavy topics were the ones that you really wanted to immerse yourself in?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I never phrased it quite like that. Mostly in my journalism, I pursued the things that interested me the most, which were things that sort of were meaningful, right? I mean, when when you have people in a life and death situation, it's meaningful. When you have people who are doing necessary jobs, like jobs that the country needs done, and they're risking their lives, and some people are losing their life to do those jobs, that's meaningful. And so it would make me interested in, say, commercial fishing rather than, race car drivers or something like that. And those guys are awesome, but whatever, the nation would survive if we didn't have that. It would be hard to feed people without commercial fishermen. So early on in my life, in my 20s, I wanted to be a writer, and couldn't put together a living to save my life. And as a writer, I was working in restaurants and all kinds. I was a terrible waiter, by the way, and um, uh, fast but very sloppy, I guess. And so I got a job. By sheer random chance, I got a job as a climber for tree companies. I was a pretty athletic kid, and I could deal with my fear of heights. And I was working 50, 60, 80, 100 feet in the air on a climbing line with a chainsaw, taking trees down in pieces for residential tree services. Obviously, a dangerous job and a scary job, and I absolutely loved it. But while I was doing it, I hurt myself. I hit my leg with the chainsaw, and it took me a few months to heal from that. And so while I was healing, this huge storm hit the east coast of the United States. I was living in the fishing town of Gloucester, and it's the storm that would become known as the perfect storm. And a Gloucester fishing boat named the Andrea Gale was lost offshore. And I was in Gloucester in that storm. I was watching these huge waves batter the houses on the eastern side of the town that faced the ocean. And afterwards, I thought, wow, here I am. I'm hurt from a dangerous job. The town just lost 6 men in a fishing boat to this storm. And maybe I'll write about dangerous jobs. And that got me on my trajectory. So I wasn't looking for, quote, heavy topics, but I understand you describing them that way. But really, in my mind, I was conceiving of it as dangerous jobs. I was commercial fishing. And then I wanted to write about war reporters. And I went off and war. And my dad was a refugee from 2 wars. He fled the fascists in Spain in 1936 when he was 13 years old, when Franco came in, and then he fled the Nazis when they came into France. And his dad was Jewish, so and he came to this country. So war was affected my family a lot, and I thought maybe I'll be a war reporter. And so I went there. I'll finish with this. There was a war much like the war in Ukraine right now. The Bosnian Serbs were attacking Sarajevo and the Bosniak part of Bosnia, and Sarajevo was besieged. And I went there and learned with no skills, no connections, nothing. I mean, I had a sleeping bag and a rucksack and a sort of quasi legitimate press pass. And I went to Sarajevo, and I sort of learned how to be a war reporter and really fell in love with that work. And so that's how I sort of wound up where I am.
And now with that, and to bring up a point that you had addressed, I think in Freedom, you talk about freedom being trading one obedience for another, right? So with all the back and forth that you were doing, do you feel like you were consistently doing that? Did you have a hard time adjusting, going from one obedience to another because you were constantly placing yourself in those types of war ravaged environments, or how were you able to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, what I meant by that is that if humans do not survive by themselves, right? The sort of myth of the sort of like independent lone wolf, like it doesn't. It's a myth. It's not a human reality. You drop a human in the wilderness by himself, and he'll probably be dead in a week. But in groups, humans thrive. So what that means is that, and you can't be part of a group if you don't respect its norms, its laws, its rules. Its myths. And so you can you can sort of change allegiances, but you're all with those allegiances come obedience to the group norm. So I looked at the American frontier back when it was in Pennsylvania in the 1700s. There was a lot of folks that went out there to escape the frankly the tyranny of the colonial government, and they went into the wilderness, which is a place of course enormous freedom. but also enormous danger. So these people, this early settlers in the wilderness in Pennsylvania, it was what was known as Indian territory, right? A very, very dangerous place. They escaped. They sort of escaped the control of the colonial government and, frankly, of society. But they could never survive out there without banding together with the other settlers that were in their area, because there was active hostilities with the native population. And so what that meant was that if you were a settler in the 1700s in the frontier in Pennsylvania, and you did not abide by the norms of the other settlers, you were not wanted. You were kicked out. And those norms meant that if there were raids along the frontier, if the natives were coming for you, right? And as a adult male, and that I think started at age 14, as an adult male, if you were not willing to stand there with a rifle and defend the community from these attacks, you were persona non grata, right? And that meant that because these attacks could come at any moment, it meant that your obligation to your community was that you be armed at all times, right? There was no military out there. There was no police. I mean, thank God we all have those things now, so we don't all have to be armed at all times. But back then, the defense was on the citizens themselves, right? They were beyond the reach of civil authority. And that meant you had to carry a scalping knife and a tomahawk and a rifle at all times with you. And if you weren't willing to do that, and there were equivalent expectations for the women, of course. If you were not willing to do that, you weren't wanted. You were obedient to that immediate community. That's the human reality. And so when we in America talk about freedom, it's a very, very important word, but it does not mean freedom from obligation. You have enormous obligations to your community, and your community in a modern country, your community isn't just your neighborhood or your town or whatever. Your community includes all of this nation, right? I mean, you have a responsibility to all of it, and that doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, an atheist, religious person, straight, gay. I don't care what you are, right? You have an obligation of some sort to this nation, to your state, to your community, to your neighborhood. I mean, it's super important thing.
Well, and like you were talking about, like you just mentioned, and then again, that was reiterated, multiple times, like tribe, war, Restrepo, freedom. It just seems like to me, the freedoms that you get being a part of a tribe like that trumps almost all other ways that one could find freedom. Like a lot of the veterans that we deal with have issues transitioning back into that civilian world because they're so used to being in a tribe where everybody looked out for each other. And what I always tell everybody is like the military for me was the most extreme version of equal opportunity employer, because we were all equally worthless and you had to prove that worth. And that's how you commanded respect, was by doing your job. Right.
Right. And respect doesn't just reflect rank. Right. So you could be a private and have enormous respect by your peers and senior officers, and you could be a general, and frankly, I mean, you have authority because you're a general, but depending on who you are and how you conduct yourself, you actually may not have that much respect. So equal access to respect, equal access to honor is crucial to a healthy community and a healthy tribe. And the problem with American society, I think, with many societies, is that often it's wealth that determines your level of respect, right? And so if you're working all day under a car fixing, mufflers or whatever, as far as I'm concerned, an enormously honorable, necessary job. But in the rankings of society, you're not like a real estate magnate, and you're not a whatever. Like people, we rank that, and we rank according to wealth, and often wealth. People are wealthy through no fault of their own, right? They inherited wealth or whatever, or for that matter, look, I have a great education, right? I went to a really good college. It's going to be a lot easier for me to accumulate wealth than someone who didn't. And I went to that college because I was from an affluent, educated family. Mm-hmm. So I have a status and respect in this society that in some ways, I mean, I think I deserve it because I think I do good work. But in some ways, I was given a head start compared to some other people. That's what's sort of unfair about modern society. I mean, I think that's what veterans sometimes sense in modern society. They come back and they're not, a great saw gunner. All of a sudden, they're just another 24-year-old walking down the street looking for a job, right? And so I think that's I think that's really, really hard. And, healthy tribal societies bestow enormous honor on warriors and all kinds of people, right? Because they're all necessary, and that they don't lose that status when they come back and rejoin society. The point for them is to come back and rejoin society. That's the point of fighting, is to allow those guys to come back and then resume whatever their duties were as a quote civilian.
Oh yeah, and I mean I have a couple of points on that, but the first thing that I think about is it, I don't know from my perspective whether or not social media and all the coverage that we have on everything that's always going on is helping us or hurting us. But every once in a while, you see these instances where, like recently in the news, there was a coal miner. I think it was University of Kentucky. He was at a basketball game. Probably
Yeah,
saw that. And
yeah.
then so he goes and he takes his kid. If you haven't seen the video or the story, there's a coal miner who, he just got off work. His son wanted to go to the basketball game, so he brought his son, and he was still dirty because he just got out of the coal mines. And all of a sudden, social media saw that and they took it and they were like, oh, it's almost like we forgot people work that hard right now. And then now they've been kind of glorifying this guy, which is great. Dude's probably a hard worker. He deserves every bit of it. He wanted to take his son to a game. But it's like, do we forget that there's so many people out there every single day that are working that hard, that are carrying this type of baggage because they don't show it on their face? You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, no, that's a great point. That was an amazing story and very heartening, I think. So, people talk about the military civilian divide. There's an everything civilian divide, right? Like, we're not connected to the guys who pump oil out of the ground so we can drive our cars. I don't know the guys who built the apartment that I live in New York City. I mean, okay, it was built 100 years ago, but whatever. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're not the people that grew the food that I ate last night. Like, I don't know those people, right? Like, so there's a because it's a complex, modern, and often wonderful society. We are disconnected from all of the things that keep us alive, right? And every once in a while, there's like a symbolic moment where it breaks through. Like, we all depend on coal energy until the day when that runs out or whatever, we replace it. But right now, we all depend on coal energy. We depend on that guy, right? And it breaks through, and we're all reminded, like, oh my God, we depend on all kinds on school teachers. We depend on school teachers, things that are way less dramatic than the U.S. Marines, right? School teachers, crossing guard. I mean, I have young girls, right? So thank God for the crossing guards, right? I mean, whatever. Like this, I mean, once you start that, thank you for your service. Don't stop with the veterans. Keep right on going to the crossing guards. Like what?
Yep.
You know what I mean? So
Right.
and so I think, like, I was walking down the street a year or two ago with my wife, and there was I live in New York City, in Manhattan, and there was a fire on 23rd Street, and flames were coming out of this apartment building. There were people in there, right? I mean, and we got there right as the fire department was getting there, and we watched this guy. And I don't know why this is so moving, but it is. We watched this guy. They shot a ladder up to the roof. It was like a 5 or 6 story apartment building, not super high, right? They shot a ladder up to the roof, and this guy went up with an axe and stepped onto the roof and started doing his thing. And I think they got a hose up there. I can't exactly remember what was happening, but you saw him go up onto the roof. There's flames coming out of part of the building, and he's on the damn roof. And my wife just started bawling. Just watching that, like, all of a sudden it broke through, or like, oh, we depend on, these are the people we depend on, right? And every once in a while it breaks through, and those are super important moments.
Yeah, I almost think it's like, I don't know, maybe just a coping mechanism for us, because there's so many heavy things happening around us at all points in time that if we were just to sit there and think about them, we would just, I don't know, be in sheer awe of everything that's happening around us, like fucking at all points in time. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Now, in regard to your time, specifically as a war journalist, I would have to imagine that in your position, because okay, so when I was overseas, I was infantry the first tour, then I became a medic, and I went over as a private security contractor for the other 5 in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I always saw it kind of from the ground up, what I see in front of me, my individual mission. But from a journalistic perspective, I have to feel like, you're almost seeing it from like a leadership type of perspective, like a macro, because you're kind of trying to piece all of it together at once. And now, when you were in Tribe, you talked about your first instance with short-term PTSD. like in the subway station, I think. Um, Out of all the stories that you covered, which one would you say kind of affected you the most profoundly?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's different ways of being affected. So, um, and I mean, just to pause and say, you're absolutely right. Normally, as a journalist, you try not to affiliate with one side or the other, with one cause or another. Obviously, the journalists who were with U.S. forces fighting the Nazis were, they weren't being objective about the Nazis, and nor should they have been, I think. But generally speaking, you try to be sort of objective, which means trying to take in all points of view and at least understand them. When I was in the Korengal Valley with the 173rd Airborne, I was at a remote outpost with 30 guys or so, and in that case, I was deliberately not trying to see the big picture. I was trying to understand what it felt like to be an American soldier in combat. And those guys are not burdened with the big picture, and nor should they be. They have a hard enough job just keeping up with what's going on right in front of them and around them, right? So I intentionally did not interview the generals and the ambassadors. And I certainly didn't give any thought to the Taliban position on all this, right? Like, I intentionally kept that out because I wanted to sort of channel what it felt like in my film Restrepo and my book War, channel what it felt like, what the experience was like to be an American soldier. So just to say, you're absolutely right about the big picture. But in that one experience that I had with American soldiers, I was deliberately not doing that. So that said, most of the wars I've covered have been wars that the U.S. was not involved in. There were civil wars all around the world, and like I said, in the siege of Sarajevo, I was in Liberia and Sierra Leone, and their terrible civil wars in 1999, 2000, around then, 2003. And I was in Afghanistan starting in 1996 when the Taliban were taking over. And I was in there, and then I went back with Massoud, Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was the leader of the Northern Alliance, who were basically our allies after 9/11. Now, Massoud was assassinated by Al Qaeda two days before 9/11. It was all part of the plan, right? And I rushed back. So I was there in 2000 with Massoud and his forces in the north in Badakhshan. And, we had some pretty heavy experiences. And that was the first time we saw a lot of badly wounded men. We were shelled very badly at one point, so intensely that our horse was killed. We had a horse to carry our gear because we were way out at a remote front line. He had a lot of camera gear. We had two horses. One of them was killed by shrapnel from these incoming Katyusha rockets. We were with a unit that had no counter batteries. I mean, we were just getting spanked on this hilltop with absolutely no strategy except waiting until they ran out of Katyushas. Like, that was our strategy, right? So, I mean, imagine you had nothing to call in. No air power, no artillery, no nothing, right? We were up there, we were with a bunch of riflemen on a hilltop, basically. And so one of our horses got killed. I'd never been in such intense shelling before. And it really, I got to say, I mean, it really did something to me psychologically. And so I got back to New York, and all of a sudden I had a panic disorder, and I could not be in a small space with a lot of people. I couldn't take the subway, couldn't be in a crowded bar. I would try to take a ski gondola at one point. A friend dragged me out skiing. We were in a ski gondola, and I just like white knuckled the whole thing, right? And because I was out of control, you're hanging on a damn wire in a basket, right? I white knuckled the whole thing. It never occurred to me that any of this was the after effects of combat, because there weren't any ski gondolas in Afghanistan. There weren't any subways. There weren't any crowded bars. It never occurred to me that the panic attacks I was having were connected to combat until much, much later. I just thought I was going crazy. I was like, I'm 38 years old, and who knew? But I like my clock ran out. Like, I'm going insane. What a pity. I had a promising career. I mean, I was like, and I was too embarrassed about it to seek help. And I'm sure if I saw counseling, somebody would have said, this might have something to do with the combat you were just in.
Getting
right?
shelled like every other day or whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that sort of powerlessness, that feeling of powerlessness produces incredible anxiety. And then you bring that home. And so I was moody. I had a temper for the first time in my life. I was depressed. I was angry. All this stuff, right? That was totally not like me, the person that I knew. And that sort of diminished over the course of the next year or so. It sort of went away. I self-healed or whatever. And then I went to Liberia in 2003, and I saw. I mean, these are just the different kinds of trauma, right? So then in 2003, wasn't in a lot of danger in the sense of that I was getting shot. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on during the Civil War. There was a lot of stuff flying around, but I didn't feel quite in the same level of danger. But what I saw was a lot of civilian casualties, like dead women, dead children, dead people, like people that didn't deserve to be dead, right? Piles of dead people. I mean, it really like short-circuited my brain. I came back from that and I was super messed up. And every time, and this is 20 years ago, and I can still feel the emotion rising up in my chest. Every time I thought about those poor people, I'd start crying.
Yeah.
And it just didn't stop. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm a year out, I'm 5 years out, I'm 10 years out, and I can't think about that too directly or I get emotional. That wound, the wound of seeing harm come to others, I don't think ever heals. I think you can heal yourself from danger to yourself, danger that you were in. I think you can move on from that like pretty naturally. I'm not sure there's any moving on from dead children. You know what I mean? Like, and God forbid if you were a soldier and through a terrible, tragic accident, you yourself caused those deaths. I don't know how. Honestly, what do you do? Like, how do you live? I mean, like, I didn't even cause any of that, right? And I'm still struggling to like make peace with it. That was terrifically hard. And then the final piece of it was I came back from Restrepo and I experienced the other component of what's broadly called PTSD, though I think sometimes it's a misnomer, where the trauma was that I missed the group that I'd been with. So it wasn't that I was so badly traumatized at Restrepo. I guess stuff was flying around, whatever. We all took our chances. What was hard about leaving Restrepo wasn't that I'd been so traumatized out there, is that it was so hard to give up being, even as a civilian, being part of that group and then giving that up and coming back to a marriage that wasn't working and a civilian life that felt meaningless. And then my buddy Tim got killed in Libya, the guy that I'd shot Restrepo with, buddy, brother, whatever, like very profound connection. If you're in combat with someone, you have a profound connection with them, even if you don't like them that much, right? You don't even have to like the guy that much to have a profound connection. He got himself killed in Libya, and all of a sudden it was my fault. Like I should have been there with him. I should have been killed, not him. And I went into the real thing, like a real depression, a real crisis. And I didn't understand it till later, but it was part of what broke up my marriage. And I was really worried about myself. I was like, bro, your life's actually in danger right now. You have to be careful. Because I caught myself thinking Tim was lucky because he died before things got shitty in life.
Mm-hmm.
He was the lucky one, right? He died a hero at age 40. I'm age 50, and I'm going to live long enough to watch everything fall apart. And when I caught myself thinking he was the lucky one, I was like, bro, you got some issues. Like you got to get ahead of this. You can't just let this happen to you because you're thinking in very dangerous ways.
And a couple of points I haven't, Brad, you let me know if you have anything to add with this. So the one thing that I wanted to mention, one of the veterans that we worked with, long story short, he was in Sadr City in 2003, not a super great area. They got attacked at night. And he'd given me permission to share his story because obviously I'm not going to identify who he is or anything. But he had a sector of fire, and he was the only one shooting in that sector. And they were receiving fire from that sector, so he returned fire. The threat was eliminated. They couldn't see because it was dark. They came back the next day to do a BDA, battle damage assessment. When they went back out there was a tarp. He goes out there. They pull the tarp, and there was a 4-year-old girl under there. And next to the 4-year-old girl was her uncle. Now, we don't know if it was him, if it was who was shooting, whoever. But since that day, he started drinking himself to death. And I talk to him all the time. I talked to him earlier this week. I still talk to him all the time. And we've done things for him, helped get him into a rehab program. We've like all this kind of stuff. But what the fuck do
Yeah.
you say to somebody who went through that? Like, thank you for your service. Like and what I try to explain to so many people, he didn't tell so many people about that until he made it through a rehab program. He was from out east. We flew him out here. We made a wish come true for him as like a reward for him finishing his rehab. And we did a video about it. And I had a local newspaper come in, record the video. And then he told us then, and he had never even told me that. And we were both medics together in with the State Department in Baghdad. And so when he said that, everything clicked in when it's like, holy shit. How do you live with yourself either way? It's just the world's worst situation. Like, what do you fucking do there? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But
That is a brutal story. That's tragic.
yes. But on the lighter side of things, one of the things that, when you talk about the Bosnia, the siege in Sarajevo, I think in Tribe, her name was Amatasevic, I think, the journalist that you were talking about. When you asked her about her time during the siege, if she was happier then, and she said, I was the happiest and I laughed more too. One of the things that I loved the most when you were in war, I think it was you were talking about the grunt perspective. Same thing in Restrepo. Like they're talking about masturbating. They're talking about the most fucked up things that there are. And they don't care because it's almost more simple and you're seeing the world for what it is. And you're talking about whatever it is you want to talk about. When I saw that, because I think the first thing I saw The Perfect Storm when I was younger, but I saw Restrepo after I got back from Afghanistan. The first thing that I did was I hit up my buddies and I'm like, you guys gotta fucking watch this. And we did, and we're like, yep. Like we saw so many things that we identified with because you didn't talk to those generals, because you talked to the grunts, E2, E3, private specialists. So important, I think, to get that perspective, right? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's, yes.
Now, okay, so I kind of bounced around a little bit in my questions here. I apologize about that. But okay, so in a lot of your works, you kind of brought up examples of times where a community of sufferers can kind of be a good thing. And you talk about how social bonds are typically reinforced during disasters because people focus more on the needs of society. I feel like I saw a lot of that early on into the pandemic, but then I feel like it's sort of, I don't know, fizzled out. What is your opinion on that thought process in relation to the pandemic that everybody dealt with?
Well, so here's a way to think about it. So I studied anthropology in college, and I see things through that lens. So humans are social primates, and in general, with evolution, the way evolution quotes gets you to do things that are adaptive, that are good for you and your species. The way evolution gets you to do that is by making those things feel good, right? So if we didn't have sex, we wouldn't have kids. The human race would stop. What's evolution do? It makes sex feel good. If you didn't eat when you were hungry, you would starve. What's evolution do? It makes eating feel good when you're hungry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that feels very good is helping a group when the group needs your help, right? You get and they know this neurochemically. You get dopamine and endorphins and all these feel good neurochemicals. That's how evolution works to sort of like urge people towards what's called adaptive behaviors, like survival-oriented behavior. So clearly, when contributing to the group and doing things for others makes people feel good, that's your sign that it's adaptive, that evolution wants us to do that. The thing about modern society is that we have solved almost all of the daily survival problems, right? Which is a great blessing, right? Let's not kid ourselves. It's a great blessing. We have a police force. We have a fire department. We have farmers who grow our food. We have, et cetera, et cetera. We are not in a daily survival struggle the way our ancestors were for 200,000 years. We have been liberated from that, which means we're liberated from our bonds to the group, which on the one hand is kind of great because the group is a form of tyranny, right? On the other hand, it's not so great because being part of a group buffers us from our psychological troubles, right? So what you find is that in a modern society where there are weirdly high levels of depression and suicide and anxiety and addiction and all these psychological ills that often come from alienation, when you have a modern society that's confronted with a crisis, all of a sudden people start feeling better because they're not thinking about themselves, they're thinking about the group. And it happens very naturally. So during the Blitz in London, the British, when the German Air Force was bombing London, virtually every night for 6 months, they killed 30,000 people in 6 months. We lost 3,000 during 9/11, 30,000 people in a country that was much smaller than the United States, right? Enormous trauma, right, to the civilian population. The authorities were worried about mass psychiatric casualties. Forget about wounded people, mass psychiatric casualties from the nightly bombings. And what happened, to their amazement, was that admissions to psych wards went down during the Blitz and then back up afterwards. And one official said, in amazement, he said, "We have the chronic neurotics of peacetime." We all know those people, right? The chronic neurotics of peacetime driving ambulances through the bombs. In other words, those people were because they were needed, were able to not think about their own troubles and think about others, and it gave them some relief from their own psychological issues. So, what a really interesting statistic is that in New York City after 9/11, Vietnam vets who struggled with PTSD, Vietnam vets reported that their symptoms went down after 9/11. Suicides in New York went down after 9/11. And the theory is that those traumatized Vietnam vets, right, you'd think 9/11 would re-traumatize them. It did the opposite. It gave them a sense of solidarity with everyone else. And that solidarity is what allowed them to feel sort of strong and whole and meaningful. And they were less connected to their trauma symptoms from, decades earlier.
And one other thing with that and that was those things that you just said were some of my favorite parts that you mentioned about tribe, especially like neurotics in peacetime were driving ambulances during all that, because you would never expect that. And I know from like an environmental perspective, I don't think you mentioned this in any of your books, and I could be wrong, but there was a study done on Vietnam veterans that were addicted to heroin in Vietnam, and they found like there was a solid percentage of guys that were addicted to heroin, and when they came home, seemingly 9 out of 10 veterans managed to kick the drug that was like the most habitual drug ever, like seemingly overnight with like little issue.
Wow.
And
That's
I think
extraordinary.
yes, and I think it's just because the importance of that change of environment, like
Right.
that it has over the mind. Now, the one thing I wanted to talk to you about before we finished up here was Vets Town Hall. So, for those that are unaware, and I've talked about it multiple times, the first thing that my organization ever did was we did a veteran town hall. We had a veteran come on, and we had several veterans come on and share their emotional perspectives of war, to be unjudged by the public, per the book. And this was before your organization started, anything like that. And there were so many emotions that day. My uncle, who was a Vietnam veteran who never shared a story, came and cried, but he didn't want to share any of his stories. But he just gave me a hug afterwards, which meant a lot. One of the veterans that shared their stories, their mom hugged me afterwards and said she had no idea. The veterans would message me the next day and talk about how great their sleep was. It's so important. Now, I got about 2 minutes here, but can you talk to me about Veterans Town Hall and how important it is to you?
Vets Town Hall is an idea that came to me really from something called the Kiowa Gourd Dance. The Kiowa were a tribe in the Southern Plains, and they had a ceremony called the Gourd Dance that was designed to reincorporate warriors off the battlefield back into society. Now, if you have someone who has spent days or weeks in the sort of killing fields, imagine how brutal the warfare back then was.
Yeah.
I mean, tomahawks and spears and arrows and knives and hand to hand, basically. It's a difficult adjustment in a tribal society as well as in our society. It's a hard thing to do, and so the Kiowa knew that. And so what they
Right.
did, they gave their warriors a chance, each one, to sing and dance and recount and boast of their exploits to the community, to recount what they did for their tribe in facing the enemy and in any form that they wanted. And so it was very cathartic for the warrior, but it also allowed or forced the tribe to participate morally in the violence. Like, you did that for us. We, like, it's our violence too. Like, it's our, we are all in this together. And when you hear the stories that a warrior, be it a Kiowa or a U.S. Marine, that when you hear the stories that a warrior carried out for you, it makes you responsible as well for that dead 4-year-old girl, or it makes you victorious as well for killing bin Laden, or whatever. I mean, whatever it is, like, it's all of society, right? It's not the soldiers' war. It's not the veterans' war. We paid for it. We voted on it. We paid for it. We sent them over there. We built the rifles. We built the airplanes. It's ours. It's not theirs. So that's the idea of the gourd dance. So how would you reproduce the Kiowa gourd dance in this context? I thought, well, the town hall is the center of every community, every city, every little town, the town hall is the center. And it's not being used on Veterans Day because it's Veterans Day. And maybe there's a parade in town, or maybe not, doesn't really matter. It's a perfect opportunity to use that space in a kind of healing way, in a connecting way. And so the Vets Town Hall is basically, you go, it costs absolutely no money. You don't even have to be a veteran to do it. You can be a civilian to set it up. You go in, you turn on the lights at the town hall, get permission, turn on the PA system, and basically any veteran of any war has the right to stand up and speak for 10 minutes to his or her community about what it felt like to serve overseas, to fight a war on behalf of this country. And the war being what it is, you're going to get a lot of different responses. You're going to get some vets who are super proud to have served. Best thing that ever happened to me, sir. Like, amazing. You're going to get other vets who are really angry. Like, why did we have to fight that senseless war, right? And you're going to get some vets who are, frankly, they're too emotional to even speak coherently. They're crying too hard to even really speak. It's all part of war. And if you, as a civilian, if you think of yourself as, well, I support the vets, sort of an empty phrase, doesn't really mean a lot necessarily. Here's a way to give that phrase meaning. You show up once a year for a couple of hours, and you sit in the space and you listen. You listen to the stories that vets have to say about serving this country. And depending on your politics, you might be puzzled by some and offended by others and heartened by others. Whatever. It's going to be a bit of everything, but that's very good for this country. And it reinforces the idea that veterans and civilians, Republicans and Democrats, we're all Americans, right? It helps get rid of those, frankly, stupid divisions. And we're all in this together. And it's cathartic for the veterans, and it allows the American public to claim their rightful part of these wars. Whether you supported them or not, they're our wars, right? And the consequences are ours. They don't belong just to the veterans, they are ours. And it's an enormously healthy thing to do. And if you are interested in doing this in your hometown, check us out at vetstownhall.org. Like I said, it doesn't cost a dime. It's super simple. And it's really one of the most meaningful things I've ever participated in. I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, and I think that it just focuses on one of the most important aspects of our society that seems like it's had its back against the wall as of recently, which is just true free speech. Because like you said, you're having veterans share really heavy things. It's not necessarily just how proud they were of their service, it's what they hated. It was military sexual trauma, it was war, it was blood, it was their friend dying, it was not understanding why they even went. And having those types of conversations where you're not going to be judged, like, alleviates a little bit of that burden, just a little bit. And if you can do that for a veteran, what better way is there to support a veteran than try to ease the burden that they're carrying around with them? So I I can't stress it enough. If anyone out there, if there's any veteran, that knows a veteran that wants to check it out, check out Vets Town Hall. Like I said, it's the first thing that our organization ever did. And before we were even an organization, and when we did it and I saw the impact that it had, that is what led me to starting the organization that works towards helping so many veterans today. But with that one other question that we had from Brad, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, you spoke about in the subway and confined spaces and coming back from journalism. So for me, that was one of the hardest things, was like loneliness and transitioning, and finding my tribe again, if you will. And then on top of that, I had some medical issues where I ended up visually impaired. Um, so that even drove me even further into
Yeah.
loneliness. How was your transition coming back as a civilian from
Yeah.
being in that experience?
Well, yeah. So I was older, right? So I had more life behind me. I think one of the difficult things that a lot of veterans who are coming back are, early mid-20s, right? I mean, their lives are still in flux and would be in flux anyway, just because of their youth. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of them, right? And I was, what was I? I was 45 when I was with that platoon out there, and so I was older, I was more mature. I had honestly, I think a better understanding, a better grip on my own emotional reactions to things. I didn't have a clue about myself when I was 22. You know what I mean?
Right,
But at
right.
45, I had a little bit more of a clue, which makes it easier. And um, also, I wasn't. I was very much accepted by that platoon, and I have some very good friends from there, right? But I wasn't a soldier, right? I mean, I still was an outsider to that. I wasn't part of the platoon like all those guys were, and even I struggled with giving up that unity. If you were actually a soldier, if you had actually served, if you were a 20-year-old out there, with a gun, and where guys were depending on you and you were depending on them, like as one of them said to me, a guy who's still a close friend, Brendan O'Byrne, he said, there's guys in the platoon who straight up hate each other, but we'd all die for each other. That, that wasn't exactly my, I couldn't have been my experience because I wasn't carrying a weapon, right? And so um, that is a profound thing to give up. That's that's not nothing, right? That's the core of the human experience, is feeling that way about other people. People feel that way about their children, and maybe their spouse. Like, I would die for you in a heartbeat. But they don't necessarily feel that way about the guys that they go bowling with on Saturday nights.
Right.
Right.
So it's a profound thing. It's what makes us human. Humans are the only species where an individual will die to protect a same-sex peer, right? Male elk don't die for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Male chimpanzees don't die for each other. Are you kidding? They'll barely die for their young, right? It's what makes humans so powerful in every sense. And so when you introduce young men or young women into a situation like that, it's ancient, it's powerful, it's profound, and then you wrench them out of it and put them back in society where the stakes just frankly don't seem very high, and because of that, the connections aren't very strong. Of course they get depressed. They're losing out, right? They're losing something. And so that, I don't, in some ways, to fix that, you'd have to fix society. And I don't know how you go about doing that.
Right.
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 And there's a lot of blessings that come from being in this society that's modern and fragmented. I mean, we get a lot of blessings for it as well. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it's a societal problem, a systemic problem. And I don't think you can entirely fix it just for the veterans. I think you'd have to address it on a society-wide basis. And I think there's things you can do to make society feel more cohesive. I think divisive language by politicians should be shunned. I mean, we have free speech in this country. You can say what you want, virtually unlimited, but that doesn't mean that we have to like it. And I think when politicians of either party speak with disrespect, speak insultingly about people of the other party, even people they disagree with, no problem. I'm not asking for agreement, but I am asking for common respect. And I think politicians and media leaders, powerful, wealthy people, who do that to our nation, who speak with disrespect about their fellow citizens, their political adversaries. It's revolting, and both sides have done it, and I think that can be condemned. I think veterans are in a perfect position to say, we fought for you guys, like, shut the fuck up, stop fighting with each other. We fought for you. We didn't fight for you so that you guys could fight with each other.
Right.
Act like speaking adults, right? I think you could say that. I think Hillary Clinton should have had that said to her. I think Donald Trump should have had that said to him. You know, on and on. I mean, both tickets all the way down, right? Like,
Yes.
that would help. And sometimes I'm asked, how do you like feel like if you're just a citizen, how do you feel like you're part of this country, like you're contributing? Like, not everyone's young and strong and able to join the Marines, right? Like, what do you do if you're a middle-aged dude? How do you feel like you're part of this? And I'll sort of end with this. There's three very simple ways that are symbolic, but they're symbolism. Don't knock symbolism. It can have some real emotional consequences. There's three things the nation needs a lot of people to do, and virtually anyone can do them, and they make you part of a greater whole. They make you part of this great endeavor of America. Vote. You need to vote. The nation needs you to vote. It is your opportunity. It's your right. It's your privilege. It's your duty. Vote. You need to serve jury duty. Do not get out of jury duty. It's fascinating. It's also quite boring sometimes. Bring a book, but whatever. Like, do not get out of jury duty. Jury duty is one of the only things keeping us from tyranny. It means that no individual can decide the fate of another person. No sheriff, no judge, no corporate boss, no president, no priest, no general. Nobody can decide the fate of another person, only a jury of their peers. You must serve jury duty, because who knows? One day you may be wrongfully accused of something, and you will need 12 jurors in the box for you, right?
Very good point.
And finally, donate blood. We can't make that stuff. It comes from the veins of other people, right? My life was saved. I had a medical emergency 2 years ago. I had an undiagnosed aneurysm in my pancreatic artery in my abdomen, super rare, not related to anything, no health issues, nothing. It's a random thing. It ruptured. I bled out into my own abdomen. When they got me to the ER, I was my blood pressure was 60/40. I was running on fumes. I was literally seeing my dead father above me, welcoming me, and I'm a damn atheist, right? I'm not religious.
Yeah.
I'm not a mystic. In fact, I'm an anti-mystic. I hate all that shit, right? And there was my dead father with his arms open, welcoming me, and I'm like, I'm not going with you. You're dead. I'm alive. What are you talking about? We have nothing about that. And I said to the doctor who was putting a line into my neck to get me blood into my system, I said to him, you got to hurry. You're losing me right now. I'm going. I was still conscious, right? But I was 60/40, and I was minutes away. And they put 10 units of blood into me. 10 people, 10 good people saved my life that day. I'll never know who they are. And now I give blood every 2 months, because I know, like, oh, I'm going to save somebody's life. We owe that to each other. And when you do it, I got to say, it feels good. You just feel like a good person, which is a feeling that can be hard to come by sometimes.
Not only that, but in doing that, the one thing that I tell people whenever people ask me what they can do to really support their veterans is just, in my opinion, making this country the country that they were proud to live for, serve for, and die for. And in doing all three of those things that you just mentioned, that's what you're doing. You are being connected to your community, connected to your society. You're being a part of something bigger than yourself, and you're accepting the fact that I can do something that can help other people, and that's why I need to contribute this. I need to contribute blood. I need my time on jury duty, whatever it may be. And that, I think, is so crucial, that often gets overlooked, especially with like the Western style of civilization, where we kind of focus on the individual.
Yeah.
But Sebastian, again, on behalf of just our organization, Project Headspace and Timing, if it wasn't for you, this podcast wouldn't exist. Our organization wouldn't. We wouldn't be helping the veterans that we're helping. I cannot thank you enough. I'm not good with words, especially compared to you. So I just want to thank you again for everything that you've done. I sincerely hope we can have you on here again sometime. And just make sure if you're out there, you check out Vets Town Hall and all the different opportunities veterans can have in your area, regardless of where you are, to share their stories and truly get that kind of support. So, Sebastian, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you guys. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. Okay, so I know you said you were nervous.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
I feel better. I got to remember, they're just people, famous or not. He's just a person, man.
Yeah, like he called me bro. I think
he did call it. I think so, or he said dude or bro or something. I was like, amazing.
It's really nice to talk to people like that, and just see them for what I'm assuming is for what they are, which he's just a, like you said, he's a person,
just a dude,
and his experiences through life are so incredibly important. The works that he has done, it's so incredibly important. I'm just so thankful that we got a chance to talk to him, man. Should we end on a high note?
Very huge.
I have a very special high note that I want to talk about tonight before we end this episode. It's really important. One of my favorite people who unfortunately passed away, and I'm not talking about my mother because she is my favorite person, but another person was Angela motherfucking Lansbury. Do you know who Angela Lansbury is?
No.
Have you ever watched Murder, She Wrote?
No.
Son of a bitch. It is a phenomenal show that oh my God, she was on Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
She was the was she the cupboard?
She was the
Teapot on Beauty and the Beast. Angela Lansbury is she was an amazing actress. She was a dame. She was a part of Murder, She Wrote, which was a show that was about a woman solving mysteries that wasn't sexualized at all at a time where sometimes, women were, to make them more popular, and she didn't need to. She unfortunately passed away. So I'm such a huge Angela Lansbury fan, for some of my friends that know, because I've seen like every episode of Murder, She Wrote. And so I wanted to bring up a couple of facts about Angela Lansbury that I just think are insane. So her daughter fell in love with a Hollywood deadbeat who introduced her to drugs, got her to steal food and money for him. And Lansbury was worried, so she moved her entire family to Ireland. And it was later discovered that deadbeat was fucking Charles Manson. So she saved her daughter from Charles Manson in the real world.
What?
In Murder, She Wrote, her name was Jessica B. Fletcher, and the B was for B. Arthur, who played Dorothy on another one of my favorite shows, fucking Golden Girls. She holds 2 world records, one for the most prolific amateur sleuth in the fiction world, for how many cases she solved on Murder, She Wrote, and another for having the most Tony Awards won. And she became a dame in 2014 for her charitable work in philanthropy. Rest in peace, Angela motherfucking Lansbury. That's all I got. I think we had a pretty solid episode today.
That was a good one.
So thank you for listening, tuning in. Please make sure that you're following our YouTube page, our Facebook page. We recently just came out with Melanie's Mental Health Mondays, which are incredible, short little pieces that could help you out dealing with just whatever you might be dealing with in the normal day-to-day. And with that, we will talk to you soon.